This show is sponsored by CLN Wash. Discover physician-developed skincare solutions specifically designed for compromised skin. Starting in the shower, CLN's skincare line of products helps promote healthy, refreshed, and comfortable skin. Visit clnwash.com to learn more and find the perfect products for your skincare needs. Guys, you know that I don't promote anything on this show that I don't personally advocate for, and I'm thrilled to share this hidden gem with you. As a lifelong athlete, working out and sweating have always been a part of my regular routine. It wasn't until college, when I was a cheerleader, that I developed back knee. I couldn't wear shirts with low backs and felt super self-conscious in my own skin. I was recommended CLN Wash by my dermatologist back then, and it cleared my breakouts. Today, I still use this product for a nice clean wash in the shower. Use code Sabrina for buy one, get one on your first purchase. Welcome to I'm Well Aware, the show that'll leave you more aware than you were before. I'm your host, Sabrina Schielein, and I'm here to help sift through the noise of wellness. Come with me on a never-ending journey to live a happier, healthier, and more fulfilled life. I'm glad you're here. I interview expert guests and people with incredible stories. We have a lot to learn from each other, so let's dive in. Yeah, how do we sound out there? We sound good? Okay,
cool.
Awesome.
Cool.
And your last name is Gottlieb.
Gottlieb. Yeah. Elie Gottlieb.
Elie, are you related to my brother's new girlfriend named Liz Gottlieb in New York?
We have so many. My dad's from the Bronx, so
Is he?
There's a good chance. No, I don't think so. My grandfather had 11 sisters, so
Wow.
we're a ginormous family.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
I don't know. I know my cousins, but I don't know them.
Yeah. No, my brother just started dating a girl named Liz Gottlieb. So when I saw your name, I was like, I feel like it's a very popular name, but there always could be a chance.
Is she cool?
She's super cool.
Okay.
I really like her a lot, so I'm sure it could be very possible.
There you go. It's in our DNA.
Elie Gottlieb.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining I'm Well Aware.
Thank you.
So happy to have you on and really bringing your expertise to my show. And when you brought your laptop out today, I was so excited to have like data and science and research and things that people can really learn from this episode. You are a sleep doctor, sleep expert. All my friends, when I told them that I was having you on, were so excited. They're like, can you ask him all these questions? Because my sleep is so messed up.
I got you.
Do you hear that often from people?
It's the first thing, when you tell someone that you're, sleep expert, sleep doctor, sleep scientist, whatever it is, like the first thing is usually like, can you help me with my sleep? The second is like, what do dreams mean? So there's a lot of interest in sleep. It's a hot topic. It has been for the past couple of years with Matthew Walker and Andrew Huberman really bringing it to the forefront of health. And yeah, it's like one of the behaviors that we can actively change to improve our overall health. So it's a lot of fun. I mean, I love what I do, and I think communicating the science of it is really important.
Yeah, well, I'm super thankful that you agreed to come on today and chat about it. But I'd love to talk about your backstory and what brought you to the world of sleep and diving into it professionally.
Yeah. So, it really started with undergrad. It was sort of like a lot of people, it was sort of just serendipitous. I took this like sleep and dreams course and just instantly that like fanned the flame. And it was actually the only professor who was taking a research student at the time. And I knew I wanted to go to grad school. I didn't know, exactly for what, whether it was going to be for like hardcore biology or something else. And she was a sleep doctor. Her background was in sleep and menopause. And she was like, well, I'm looking for a research student, someone to really understand and create a research project around blue light blocking lenses in sleep. So I've always had this interest in sort of consumer sleep technology, and it's what I actually do now. So we were one of the first to actually look at the effects of blue light blocking lenses on sleep and melatonin suppression, and an app called Flux on the screen. A lot of people probably have that, or like dark mode. And I loved it. So I did some great research with her, And then after I graduated, I worked at Johnson & Johnson for about 3 years, sort of built my way back up to like a more permanent research position with them, leading some of their sleep research. And then I decided that, it was time to go to grad school. There's only so much you could do in the research space without a PhD or without, a PsyD. So then went to Australia. I had gone backpacking around New Zealand for about 2 months. It was the most incredible trip of my life. And I'm like, if I'm going to spend, 5 to 7 years in school, I want to be somewhere that I love. And University of Melbourne, Florey Institute of Neuroscience in Australia has a great program specifically around the neuroscience of sleep. So I did my PhD there in neuroscience with a focus in sleep and chronobiology. And it was more on the clinical side of things. So I worked with stroke patients, trying to understand what happens in the brain that's specific to sleep in someone who's had a stroke. We basically found that, stroke patients, after they've had a stroke, have these newfound or like de novo sleep disorders that are actually associated with worse recovery after the stroke. So it was a really interesting area. And then I did a postdoc in Alzheimer's disease, so sort of neurodegeneration space. And there's a lot of research now showing the effects of sleep deprivation on risk of Alzheimer's, and the effects maybe of increasing the amount of deep sleep on potentially reducing the amount of risk that someone might get later on in life for neurodegeneration. So worked in that population for a while, and then had this really amazing opportunity to work for a startup, which is where I'm at right now, where I had some of their sleep science. And basically, my role now is how do we help not those that have a clinical sleep disorder. So it's really 10 to 20% of the population that has a sleep disorder. It's most of the population, probably like us, 50 to 70%, who have what we call subclinical threshold sleep issues. So these are issues just like with poor quality sleep, too much wake after sleep onset, poor sleep efficiency. So these kinds of things that don't necessarily merit a clinical sleep diagnosis or clinical sleep treatment. And the problem with this population is sort of they're just like left to their own devices. Like if you wanted to figure out how to get better sleep, you go into Google, you type in sleep hygiene, and there's nothing really useful or like personalized and dynamic. So that's what we're all about now is creating personalized and dynamic programs for people who don't necessarily have sleep disorders, but also screening for sleep disorders. Because if you do have a sleep disorder, and this is one thing I want to put out there, is it needs to get diagnosed. So 90% of people with, for example, obstructive sleep apnea goes undiagnosed. So it's a huge problem, the underdiagnosis of sleep disorders. And then, of course, treatment pathways are in place to help people who do have those.
I love hearing about your backstory, about where you've been in the world, just your journey getting there and why.
Yeah.
It's super special. And I'm so grateful that you are in it because I get to talk to you today and really hear all of your insight after all this research. I think one of the big things, too, about my podcast is it's called I'm Well Aware. It's really just becoming more aware of things that we can do in our lives to make our lives better and easier. And, like you said, with sleep issues like you and I might have or others out there that might not be at, a severe level, it really can be like changing what you're doing and being mindful of it and being aware and just understanding how things relate, like you were saying with blue light and all these things. If you're not in the research, if you're not doing it, if you're not having these conversations, how would you know?
Exactly.
How are you going to sift through the internet and try to figure it out and piece it together on your own if you don't even become conscious that, it's something that can really hurt you later on in life?
Yeah, and a lot of people here, like, one thing I wanted to say was like people need to understand the biology of sleep and like how does someone, number one, how does our brain initiate sleep and when does it know to initiate sleep? Like that information is really powerful because if you have that knowledge, then you can really set yourself up for success throughout the night and then during the day, because really sleep happens as soon as you wake up. Actually, the mechanisms that are in place to help you get quality sleep happen as soon as you wake up, not in the hour or two before bed.
I was telling you today, I am out in here in LA. We're recording from the studio out here. And I don't go out a ton in New York. I really have been trying very hard over the past, couple months to get good sleep and to prioritize that. And I've felt such a difference in myself when I do that. Going out in LA, I'm like, if this podcast sucks today, you're gonna tell me that there's science backing why
100%.
why
The lack of sleep. How much did you sleep last night? Don't lie.
Let's see. I went to bed at 5.
Oh,
and I got up at 11.
This is a perfect segue.
I'm your lab rat.
You are.
Your
This is
case
a
study.
perfect segue. So one thing I wanted to tell people was like, okay, so how does the brain know how to initiate sleep? And it's called the two-process model of sleep. And there's two processes. The first one is very simple. It's called sleep pressure. The longer we stay awake, the higher this pressure builds throughout the day or throughout the night, in your case, if you're totally sleep deprived. So I'm sure you're very sleepy right now because you probably didn't, and once you fall asleep, finally, that sleep pressure goes down. Once you get consistent, sufficient, and quality sleep, that pressure goes down. That's why, for example, if you've ever pulled an all-nighter before, or even if you just didn't get sufficient quality sleep, you feel this pressure to actually sleep during the day. So that's the first one. It's this sleep pressure. And what does that actually look like in the brain? There's a molecule called adenosine, and it has a lot of functions. But one of the functions is to really signal to the rest of the body that it's time to sleep. Adenosine tends to build up the longer we stay awake. For example, that's why coffee and caffeine works, because coffee, or caffeine in particular, has a very similar molecular structure to adenosine. So it binds to adenosine in the brain, those adenosine receptors in the brain, and tricks our brain into thinking that we're not tired. That's why once the caffeine wears off, you get this surge of adenosine, and then you get that post-caffeine crash, right? So that's the first one. It's the sleep pressure that builds up. So for the average person, if you are not building up sufficient sleep pressure, and you try to get into bed, it's going to be very difficult to sleep, right? So you need to be awake for a certain amount of time. You need to be doing things that are useful in pushing up that sleep pressure, whether that's cognitively demanding tasks or physical activity. Also, when we're sick, our immune functioning is building up the sleep pressure in order to get us to fall asleep. That's the first one. So that's sleep pressure. The second one that tells our body when to initiate sleep is called the circadian rhythm. You've probably heard of it anecdotally. It's right. It's our biological clock. And what's amazing about the circadian rhythm is that it's not just a 24-hour clock, a little bit over a 24-hour clock for most people, but every single cell in our body has its own sort of circadian rhythm. And all of those cells and organs in our body are then sort of orchestrated by a master timekeeper deep within our brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. So what happens when you have sufficient sleep pressure, but your external environment isn't syncing with your internal circadian clock? You get things like jet lag, right? I'm experiencing that. I just got back from Iceland a couple days ago, and I have all the sleep pressure, but my body is not primed from a circadian perspective to actually sleep because it thinks it's a different time.
I mean, what's the time difference to Iceland from here is?
It was a lot. It was 8 hours.
8 hours.
Yeah, so it was quite a big difference.
Did you sleep well while you were there?
I did. I slept okay, and that was because of light. So the strongest environmental cue that influences our circadian rhythm is light, right? So that's why people who've recommended sort of solutions for jet lag typically involve things like light. So as soon as you wake up in the morning, or ideally in the time zone that you're trying to get broad spectrum sunlight. So you've heard a lot of things, I think, in the news about blue light, and people really demonize blue light. The problem with that is actually blue light in the morning and even afternoon hours is super important. Broad spectrum light from the sun or light therapy glasses not only can help set our circadian rhythm, but they help with things like performance. There's been a ton of research, for example, on cognitive performance after people have been exposed to blue light. That's why we have warehouses with very, very bright light to help their workers perform at a maximal level. So the circadian rhythm is this really interesting and I think understudied area. They're looking at things now, for example, with like cancer treatment, so chronotherapy. So what we're finding is actually the timing that you induce things like any kind of cancer treatment is maximally sensitive to the timing. So like, for example, with chemotherapy, there have done studies now showing that depending on the time that you actually give someone chemotherapy, it might have different results.
Oh, wow.
So it's like, what time are cancer cells, for example, most sensitive to chemotherapy? So it's a really incredible area. And for the average person, the circadian rhythm is especially interesting because it's easier to influence than the circadian rhythm than sleep itself. Like, there's only so many things you could do for sleep. The circadian rhythm is really sensitive to things like sunlight, physical activity, our eating habits, our social timing. So things like social jet lag. Like, most people go to bed and wake up at the same time, ideally every single day during the weekday. But then on Friday, like you just experienced, they finally have a night out, right? So they go to bed at 5 a.m. instead of 10 p.m.
Some people.
And they're basically jet lagged.
Yeah.
And the difference between social jet lag and jet lag is that, with traditional jet lag based jet lag, with like a travel based jet lag, once you've acclimated, it goes away. Social jet lag happens every single week. So it's a huge problem. So we're trying to come up with ways now to reduce the effects of social jet lag and get people sleeping more regularly, even on the weekends.
Yeah, because if I'm getting great sleep during the week, but then I'm getting crappy sleep on the weekend, it's got to be affecting me overall in general.
100%. Yeah, I mean, like I said, every single cell in your body has its own clock. So your digestive system has its own clock. Obviously, there's the master timekeeper deep in your brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus that's trying to harmonize the kick drum of all of these separate clocks. So if one of those goes out of whack, right, then it can have this like domino effect on the rest of your physiology.
So I used to have some jobs where the hours would be pretty crazy.
Yeah.
I'd have to be in the office at sometimes 5 a.m. and then might have to stay there till midnight when I was doing events.
Yeah.
Because obviously it's all over the place when companies want to plan events, when they want to do them. And I definitely got into this rhythm where I kind of thought I was like above sleep. I thought, I'm building up my tolerance. Like, I'm fine with not getting a lot of sleep. And I was able to perform daily. I was able to, speak in front of a room of 100 people on like minimal sleep and do my job and be focused. But I got to the point where I realized, like, I actually don't feel good. I actually want to feel better than what I'm experiencing. And I just wasn't even being aware of it. I was like, I knew that I wasn't getting great sleep, but I was putting it on the back burner and didn't make it a priority. Whereas now, besides last night and besides when I'm social, I really do try to get good sleep because I feel a change within myself. But the last time I was in LA, I flew on a red eye back to New York. I had to do a shoot in the morning for a friend. Then I had to edit the photos. Then I had to go pick up my cat in Brooklyn. So 2 hours of driving. I like barely slept on the plane. Tried to go to bed. A drunk neighbor was banging on my door at 12:30, and I ran a half marathon the next morning. And
that's just like human resilience stuff. That's like, no matter what, even if you'd gone 2 days without sleeping, you would have done that, because that's incredible.
But at the same time, it was funny because I ran a half marathon the month prior in Philly with my friends, had great sleep, was so relaxed. I looked so like easy breezy in those photos because photographers get photos of you while you're running. The photos that I was in, I posted them, but I was like, I look disheveled. Like, this was a month apart, and I genuinely, like, you could see it in my physical appearance, just how exhausted I was. I pushed through. But, like, that can't be good for me.
It's not. And I bet if you had actually gotten sufficient quality sleep the night before, your timing would have been much better, right? This is one of the most, like,
But the timing of I did better that time than Billy.
Shh, don't tell you're killing the
Am
story.
I ruining the science?
That's an anomaly. But I would say maybe it's because you trained more. But if you did get sufficient sleep, well, there's actually a few things.
I felt like garbage.
You felt like garbage. So I bet you would have probably had maybe a similar time, but you wouldn't have felt as crappy.
Yeah.
Right? There is research showing the effects of sleep deprivation on like exertion. So like how tough does this actually feel? And those that are sleep deprived, and that are they're doing some kind of like strength training, for example, they'll rate the perceived rate of exertion significantly higher versus those that got sufficient quality sleep. So it would have been easier for you if you probably slept enough the night before.
Yeah, and like this is really where I love talking about this today, because I love hearing also like the myths from your perspective of like things that you hear all the time that people do, the kind of excuses people make, like my own, being like, I'm fine, it's all good. But like what myths have you heard? I feel like we should start maybe with dreams, because I feel like it's such a common ask. So when I get poor sleep and I'm up late, I don't have dreams. But when I've been getting more sleep lately, I've been having dreams.
You put yourself into myth number one, which is that we don't dream sometimes. The truth is we dream every single night.
Okay.
So if you've entered REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, you're probably dreaming. There's also other stages of sleep where there's some slight visual hallucinations that there's a debate whether those are dreams or not. But everyone dreams every single night if you have REM sleep. Typically, REM sleep happens in the second half of the night. That's why if you're remembering your dreams, it's because you actually woke up during REM sleep in the second half of the night. So it's totally fine not to remember your dreams. It just means that you actually slept through that REM sleep cycle. And really, when we do sleep research and when we do dream research and we ask people to recall their dreams, what we actually have to do is set them up with EEGs, check to see when they're actually dreaming, when they're in REM sleep, and then wake them up. That's really the only way we can get an accurate measure of what, like the qualitative aspect of dreams, what's someone actually dreaming. So that's myth number one, is that sometimes you dream, sometimes you don't. It's not the case. You dream every single night. You typically only remember your dreams if you woke up during a REM sleep cycle. And an example of something, causing REM sleep arousal or awakening is THC and marijuana. So THC tends to suppress. It's a pretty potent REM sleep suppressor, as is alcohol. And when people stop using THC or stop smoking, they'll get what's called a REM rebound. So the amount of REM that they didn't have before comes roaring back with a passion. And you get typically the average person will spend, say, 10 to 20% of the night in REM sleep. Depends on the person. People who have REM rebound will spend up to like 50% of the night. So it which is not normal in REM sleep. The same thing with alcohol. Alcohol for a long time was thought to be like, it's great at getting me to fall asleep. And technically, people who drink alcohol excessively will fall asleep faster. But then the horror show happens. Then you really start to see fragmentation in sleep throughout the night. So although it's getting you to fall asleep faster, it's causing you to, there's a significant increase in wake after sleep onset, poor overall sleep efficiency, worsening amount of REM sleep. So all these things that you don't want in an ideal night of sleep.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my friends and people that bring up dreams, like they get worried. They get like, I don't know why I'm not dreaming. I don't know why I'm like having these dreams. Is there ever a way you can control what you're dreaming?
There is some research on lucid dreaming, and it is its own like behemoth of a scientific area, because what we're finding is that although it is possible with training to lucid dream, it's not associated with restorative sleep. People who chronically lucid dream, you think about it, like sleep in general is a time to rest and restore. When you're actively trying to control the dream, although it's super interesting, and people that do it tend to enjoy it, they wake up the next morning feeling exhausted, right? So although it's interesting at first glance, it's not conducive to quality sleep and restorative sleep, which is ideally what we all want. So I'd say, like, if you're on the hunt for lucid dreaming, sure, there's a ton of, like, guides and research out there to support you. And it's still a sort of gray area. Lucid dreaming is on this border between, like, proper science and a little bit of pseudoscience. Depends who you ask. But, I think dreaming, the function of dreaming is still unclear. Sleep in general is a really novel field. We've only really started to understand the function of sleep in general since the 1980s. The first sleep lab was developed in Stanford, Bill Dement, and it's a really developing area. And dreams are really hard to measure. Like, sleep itself is already hard to measure. It's inherently a neurological state, a brain state with different, there's the brain goes through different stages of sleep throughout the night. But dreams in particular are hard because we tend to try to, in dogs, for example, we, like, always anthropomorphize them, and we try to create meaning to something that,
like when they're running on the ground and
Exactly.
you see them, like,
Yeah.
twitch, and you're like, oh, they're running through a field, maybe.
Exactly.
Or maybe they're running from something. I don't
Exactly. Actually, if you really want to know if your dog is in REM sleep, look at their eyes. So it's called REM because of rapid eye movement. The main distinct factor of dreams and REM sleep in particular is that our eyes go left and right, left and right, left and right, or even up and down, up and down. We're looking at things in our dreams. So, dreaming is still really understudied. It also makes very little sense from an evolutionary perspective. We spend a third of our lives sleeping. We should be in this, when you sort of from the outside looking in, you're in this apparent state of passivity. But when you actually hook up an EEG to someone's head and you look at the electrical activity of someone specifically in REM sleep, their brain is almost as active, sometimes even more active than it is during our wakening state. So, like, you would think that during sleep, our brain is chilling, it's relaxing, but something is happening during REM sleep where it's working in overdrive. And the truth is, we still don't know exactly what it is. We think maybe that there's something called synaptic pruning, where all of the synapses, there's obviously too much external stimulation throughout the day. During REM sleep, our brain literally prunes either memories or synapses to make way for other more important ones. We also know REM sleep is also really, really critical in our emotional regulation. That's why if you deprive someone of just REM sleep and you have them do emotional tasks, it's a nightmare. No pun intended.
Yeah, no, don't ask me to do any emotional tasks.
Exactly. That's why people say, like, if you have an emotional thing or even something that's, like, cognitively demanding that you need to think about, sleep on it.
It's really interesting to hear about the way that, science affects our sleep and what it actually looks like and the reality of it, because many of us don't know. The majority of people, like, we don't know that these things are happening. We don't know what's causing them. I think something that a lot of people would benefit from hearing your perspective on is how they can fall asleep better. So, Elie, are you a night owl? Are you a morning person? And we're only honest on this show.
Yeah, I'm a hardcore night owl.
Same.
And you are too?
Always been.
I'm so sorry.
But trying really hard to not.
It's so tough because we live in this early birds world, right? There's like this societal influence to work from 9 to 5, right? To at very young age it's instilled in us, despite children and kids having a circadian rhythm that is optimized to wake up late and go to bed late. We're forcing them to start school at 7 a.m. That's why I'm part of the California Sleep Society, and we've worked to change school start times across California to push it a little bit, back to get kids sleeping that extra hour or 30 minutes if possible. And yeah, I'm a hardcore night owl. And like I said, we live in a really early birds world. And the problem is, like,
a lot of stigma around it.
So much stigma. So, like, one example is, I often refuse to take pre-8 a.m. meetings. And, I work for a B2B company where we have partners in Germany and Asia, all over the world, and we have to set them up for success. And I think what's really difficult is, work, a lot of work schedules are just not conducive to night owls. So I've just had conversations with, other companies, our own company, internally, like we have to practice what we preach. For us hardcore night owls, you're going to get more out of us if you let us start a little bit late and work a little bit later as well. So there is some research showing that if, and let me just back up for a second. Unfortunately, because of all the societal influences, night owls are at an elevated risk of a range of things, right? So don't want to scare anyone out there. I feel like it's very easy to do that in the sleep space where you tell people you're at an elevated risk of this, this, and this. But night owls in particular, and shift workers as well, they're at an elevated risk of, when we look at the studies, things like just all-cause mortality, right? Like the risk of dying for any reason is unfortunately higher for night owls when we compare them to strong morning types or morning larks. So, there is now research trying to understand, well, what can we do to get someone who's a strong night owl to become either less of a strong night owl, more of like an intermediate type? Like, you don't need to get them to become strong morning types, but can we push them sort of back a little bit? And some of the research has shown, and it's not fun at all to do, but broad spectrum sunlight first thing in the morning is important. As we mentioned, it's one of the most strongest environmental cues for our circadian rhythm. And then high intensity interval training first thing in the morning for a strong evening type. Wake them up at the time that they're looking to wake up, or actually start slowly, like 15 minutes at a time. Don't just if you'd prefer to wake up at like 10 a.m. and you want to wake up at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., don't just make that switch overnight. Start 15 minutes a day, slow, right? And as soon as you wake up, like broad spectrum sunlight, and then high intensity interval training or any kind of like exercise in the morning. That, again, physical activity is another cue that influences our circadian rhythm. So those two things combined can sort of shift the clock for us strong evening types. But with that said, if you work a job that allows you to be a night owl, lean into it. There's nothing wrong with it.
I appreciate you saying that. And it's funny because in college, when I could plan my schedule, I never took courses before 11 a.m.
Yeah.
I would study throughout the night. I was very focused. And I loved school. I loved going to class. I loved studying. I loved learning. And I was doing my best work on that rhythm that I was choosing and what felt natural to me. I really love the fact that you are advocating for practicing what you preach. For a lot of people who are night owls, you can feel pretty isolated and pretty alone in that, struggling to navigate. So for people that at the moment can't control their schedules, who are natural night owls but do have these early jobs, what are some tips or myths that you can help bust about trying to get to bed earlier and just the anxieties, I think, going into sleep when you have to wake up early, but you might be struggling to fall asleep?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think the first thing is light hygiene. So again, the power of light, let's harness it. So within the first hour after waking up, get at least 15 minutes of sunlight. Either that's through sunlight or some kind of light therapy glasses if you live in a place where there's not a ton of sunlight. Throughout the day, it's also important to get enough sunlight. So get consistent indoor or ideally outdoor light or sunlight. And then during the evening, that's when you need to start reducing the amount of light in and around the house. So I typically try to mirror the sunset. So once the sun starts to set, my lights start to set as well. So I start to just dim them. That typically happens in the 3 to 5 hours before bedtime. And then while sleeping, keep your bedroom as dark as possible. So if you need to invest in some blackout blinds, do that. And the reason I'm talking about all of these things is because it all leads up to a ideal wind down routine. The truth about sleep is that it's not just a switch that happens. It takes a lot of effort for our body to build up that sleep pressure and to have that circadian rhythm in place to know how to and when to initiate sleep. So all those things that light hygiene sort of helps our circadian rhythm. And then it's about creating the ideal circumstances behaviorally to sort of land the plane when it comes to sleep, unlike that light switch, right? Like I, for example, for a very long time was doing work until the second I wanted to get into bed, right? So I'd close my laptop and then I'd try to fall asleep. Well, my brain is not primed in this moment to sleep because I, number one, just got exposed to potentially a lot of blue light. But what's more important than the blue light itself is the actual like cognitive demand that was happening prior to sleep. You need to be as sort of relaxed and sort of chill as possible in the hour before bed to land that plane instead of just flipping a light switch, right? So sleep, it takes a range of things to create the ideal opportunity to sleep. So for us night owls, that's what I generally recommend is like create a consistent nighttime routine that involves things like guided meditation before bedtime, a warm bath before bedtime. So actually, contrary to maybe popular belief, a warm bath actually helps cool our core body temperature. And our core body temperature, in order to initiate sleep, it has to drop by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you were to do it in the opposite direction, that would be the equivalent of a mild fever. So 2 degrees is a lot. And a warm bath in about the 30 to 45 minutes before bedtime can help drop that core body temperature. When we talk about temperature as well, temperature is also a really important cue for our not only circadian rhythm, but sleep. What's the ideal temperature? I'm insane. I like my, I keep it at like 65.
Wow, that's so cold.
Yeah.
To me.
Yeah. And it's actually been a deal breaker on dates too. Like I'll literally, someone's like, yeah, I sleep with like 75. I'm like, I will die. I literally will not. And then humidity is important as well. So they've done a lot of studies showing that actually the percentage of indoor humidity is also associated with poor sleep. So reducing that humidity so you don't feel like sticky in bed. So a dehumidifier can help some people. And then, physical activity during the day. I like to combine my physical activity with light, so I'm getting the best of both worlds. I get a lot of people asking me, like, how can I increase the amount of deep sleep that I get throughout the night? And the truth is that there's no silver bullet when it comes to deep sleep. We always think it's like the sexiest stage of sleep because it's been sort of purported to be that. And all stages of sleep, I think, are equally important. If they weren't, they wouldn't be there. We wouldn't be going through them. But one thing you can do for deep sleep is physical activity. So it's one of the main behavioral tools that you have in your arsenal to increase the amount of deep sleep that you get throughout the night. High intensity interval training, moderate intensity exercise as well, have been shown to increase the amount of deep sleep that we get throughout the night.
I love all those tips, and they're so helpful for people to hear. It's so funny what you mentioned about temperature, because my favorite question to ask my friends who are in relationships is like, so what's your ideal temperature and what's her ideal temperature? Like, what's the balance here? And oftentimes there will be a disagreement between men and women about, or even couples of the same sex.
We run warm. Like I'm also half Colombian, and like the Colombian blood in me is like, I'm sorry, but it's like warm. I'm all perpetually warm. So I also have a dog that has like a double coat. So like, poor guy, I don't want him to suffer.
A weighted blanket you got.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's, well, there actually is some research on weighted blankets as well. They've done, it's a crazy study showing that it actually increases the amount of melatonin that you release throughout the night. So, I think look, there's a lot of people doing, like, they have bed divorces where like couples will sleep in totally either different bedrooms or just different beds. And you have certain products out there that are intended to change the actual temperature of the bed. I won't name drop, but there's a ton of, a couple of companies, let's say, out there that can change the temperature of your bed. So if you want to sleep a bit more, cool, you can. If you always run cold, then you can warm it up a little bit. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear the dynamic and really the science behind it. I totally have seen that happen where couples will like want to sleep in separate rooms, will want to get those different beds so that they're able to create the environment that's best for them. Something that really has helped me lately is sleeping with more pillows.
Yeah.
I kind of like cocoon myself now.
Yeah.
I used to sleep like prison mate, one pillow, sometimes like no pillow. I would just like be flat and like I would have trouble sleeping.
Yeah.
And then I was like, why don't I just try to like cuddle myself with a bunch of like thick pillows, and it really helps me to go to sleep easier.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably similar with the weighted blanket, like the science behind the pressure that we feel when we're sleeping, maybe like the safety of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know any like, research there you want to share?
There is some research on weighted blankets and some clinical populations. I mentioned that melatonin one, and that was in healthy populations. My company, we've actually done some validation studies on the weighted blanket showing that it does improve sleep. It also depends on the person, right? Like some people, maybe that would make them feel claustrophobic. So maybe it's not good, wouldn't be ideal for them. Other people, it has this like, anti-anxiolytic effect where it just reduces anxiety. It's just comforting. We see this in populations with autism spectrum disorders, where you give them a weighted blanket and they feel a little bit better, right? There's a reduction in anxiety or some symptoms. So there definitely is research on it. And look, I think everyone should take a personalized approach to your own sleep, right? Like there's no reason why you can't try different things. If none of these things are helping and you're still struggling with sleep, that's when it's time to sort of, say, is there something else going on here? Is there something more underlying going on that requires physician, supervision, testing? So if there is, then that's when you talk to your doctor, ask for a formal sleep test, and rule out any sleep disorders. And if you don't have that, then you could try the more like behavioral tactics. So yeah, there's a ton of research out there on I wouldn't say a ton, but there is research on, non-pharmacological, non-invasive therapies and products to help the average person sleep better. And just going back to the temperature thing, what we typically recommend is that you're comfortably cool. Almost across the board, there are some differences. There's individual variability in thermoregulation. And this is especially important in perimenopausal, and there's a lot of research now in sleep and women's health. Anything you could do to cool your core body temperature and be comfortably cool in bed is probably going to be better for your sleep than something that is uncomfortably warm or uncomfortably humid.
I love the approach also with just listening to your body and trusting your body. We all know our body the best and how it feels. And I think, I've heard situations where, people are kind of thrown medicine to immediately, get them to sleep if they're struggling with their sleep. But I do wonder, is there a world where we should be just listening to our body, trying out all these tips that you're mentioning, trying to change the lifestyle, trying to create that environment first before we just jump into the most, extreme way to fall asleep. And then 100%. That's my fear of getting dependent on something that I may not need. I may just need to, have an actual proper wind down. I get weary jumping too quickly into medicine first if you're not sure if it's for you or it's just kind of prescribed pretty quickly.
Yeah, agreed. Look, the truth is that most medical doctors in the United States get between 30 minutes to 2 hours of sleep training during their entire medical degree. So it's just not enough, right? It's getting better now that we know about the importance of sleep. So if your doctor is quick to prescribe, and this is not medical advice, take your doctor's recommendation. But if they're very quick to prescribe some kind of sleeping medication for a longer term period, then maybe get a second opinion. I think it's really important that we first rule out, like I said, a clinical sleep disorder, whether that's something like chronic insomnia, restless leg syndrome, obstructive sleep apnea. There are many different sleep disorders that, unfortunately, as I mentioned, go undiagnosed. And it's not to scare anyone to say that you might have it, but before taking a more drastic approach, a pharmacological approach, rule those out because there are lifestyle adjustments that can help you improve your sleep. So yes, I absolutely agree with you. And that also leads into the supplements industry, where people are reaching for the melatonin, the ashwagandhas of the world. And, I think it's important, again, that we think about taking a personalized approach to supplements in general, right? The truth is, in the United States, the supplements industry is not well regulated by the FDA. There's very limited regulation by the FDA. What does that actually look like? Well, they've done studies looking at melatonin and the actual, when you go to pick out a melatonin supplement from your typical grocery store. By the way, melatonin in most countries is not over the counter. You can't just buy it as a supplement. It's prescribed. If you have looked at the research on melatonin in the United States, when they look at the actual dosage of melatonin across various supplements, if you thought you were getting a 5 milligram melatonin tablet, which is already hundreds of thousands of times more than the body is naturally producing, studies have shown that the actual the dosage ranged from negative 80%, so lower than what you're actually getting, to plus nearly 500%. So you thought you were getting a 5 milligram tablet of melatonin, you're actually getting 25 milligrams, which is, based on the research, significantly higher that is useful for, and this is important, circadian rhythm issues. Melatonin is typically not used for just the initiation of sleep or the maintenance of sleep. It's primarily used for circadian rhythm issues. So for jet lag, it's great, right? It's important to take it at the correct time. Other circadian rhythm issues, phase delay disorder, phase advanced disorder, those are all things that need to be spoken about with your doctor before you're just reaching for the melatonin tablets.
We all love to self-diagnose and think
Dr. Google is strong, it's like, and the other problem with a lot of supplements is that there are contaminants. So the study that I'm referring to, I think they found that 30% of the supplements had other contaminants in them, things like serotonin, which in high enough dosages can be lethal, right? So again, it's not to scare anyone away from using melatonin, but number one, it's most of the research on melatonin for jet lag, for example, has shown that it's 1.5 milligrams that's most beneficial. That's all that's really needed. And now we're getting high dose melatonin tablets all over the place. So there are so many supplements out there, ashwagandha, right, L-theanine, and it would be a whole, conversation on its own. But just, think twice about just reaching for that melatonin tablet or the ashwagandha or especially the Tylenol PM, any kind of Benadryl, right? These are things that probably are fine for the short term, but there is research showing that there are harmful effects when taken longitudinally or across the lifespan.
Thank you for sharing that and your perspective. I know this episode is going to help so many people just to get a grasp on sleep. Maybe they've never talked to this is my first time talking to someone on sleep, and I'm really just so thankful that you're here, that you do this research, that you're so passionate about it, because it really comes through and helps so many people. I can't believe how fast time goes by.
I know.
But Elie, I want to leave people with, kind of a final thought from you. If they are struggling with sleep, feeling alone, what advice would you give to someone kind of taking that first step? This whole episode is full of amazing tips, but if you want to leave people with one last, tidbit of what you want to share. Yeah,
there's other really cool non-invasive ways to potentially improve your sleep. So things like gratitude journaling, right? There's been a lot of research on that. Nostalgia, pre-sleep nostalgia has been shown to make us feel good before bedtime. So a lot of the research is just how do you make someone feel good before bedtime, and does feeling good before bedtime actually help people fall asleep faster? Mindfulness meditation, of course, right? So, one thing I would say is listen to the experts out there, people who have PhDs and MDs in this stuff, because I think there's a lot of misinformation, especially on the TikToks of the world. We didn't get to, Sleepy Girl mocktail.
Have to have you back.
I know, let's do it again.
Yeah,
there's a lot more to cover, but listen to the experts, and then listen to your body. Your body typically knows best. With that said, there's the placebo effect. So there's some things that might not actually be helping or might be making things worse at a physiological level but your brain is really strong in believing that things can happen sometimes. So the placebo effect can work its wonders as well. So try to be as evidence-based as possible. Listen to people who know what they're talking about, and just try to feel good before bedtime. Exposure to light, harness the power of light. It can improve not just your sleep, but your performance, and rule out any sleep disorders, because that can be pretty sinister.
Elie, thank you so much for everything today, for your perspective. We really do have to have another episode, and I'm back out here because I've learned so much today, and I know that so many people will.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here next week on the path to becoming more aware.